Dexter is an American TV drama that needs little introduction. Theatre legend and 6 Feet Under star Michael C. Hall plays Dexter Morgan, a vigilante serial killer convinced he's doing the right thing by stabbing people. But they're bad people, so it's fine. Nearly 2 decades since its debut, Dexter occupies a strange space in TV history. Once a critical darling, it is now considered a cautionary tale of how not to end your own show. Ask a critic in 2009 and they'd call it prestige television. Ask them 30 seconds after watching the finale and you'll get a begrudging shrug. And if you're masochistic enough to ask Reddit, you'll find that Dexter isn't one show, it's now 2. Bisected and split cleanly down the middle, just like one of Dexter's targets. The first half is solid gold, liquid television, up there with The Wire, Deadwood, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, and 6 Feet Under, some of America's finest. The second half, however, is unwatchable refuse, peak TV offal at its worst. This reputation put me off watching it for many years. Why waste 100 hours of my precious life watching something that famously ends badly? Well, recently I was ill enough not to care, and I took the plunge. For you. And for content. Tonight we'll go through some of the major story beats, the direction and trajectory of the show, the mechanics of how it works, the interplay of writing and acting, its unreliable narrator, some of its finer moments, and the times that it drops the ball. And together I want to try and answer a seemingly easy question. Was Dexter ever good? But really what I'm focusing on is whether the show was any good. Dexter the program, to me at least, is at a constant pace of being okay. It has mountainous highs, but it has chasmic lows, a story of valleys and peaks all throughout. As we'll discuss, part of this is directly tied to how the Dexter character tries to convince you that he's great, and also a measure of how invested we are in that great lie. It's also a cautionary tale for why, if you're writing anything big, you should always plan ahead at least a little bit and map out where things are going to go. Because unfortunately, if you don't have any idea what's going to happen next, you can make some very big blunders that really screws you over in the long run. Dexter as a show exists in the interesting space of television that I'm going to call the cuddly murder. We all love detective shows, right? Think Bergerac, Death in Paradise, Midsummer Murders, Murder, She Wrote, and Did, Psych, the list goes on. Lovable rogue-eccentrics solving crimes that we wish could be solved like that in the real world. Or maverick cops beating the odds, your Magnum PIs, your Miami Vices, your A-teams.
Guns don't work on Sunday.
There's a rhythm to these shows. They're, on the surface, straightforward plots, but they do still get you to think. There's a game afoot constantly. There's fun intrigue. There's an ensemble cast of characters that you'll like, even if they're not as important as the person whose name is usually in the show. And day players that sort of aren't particularly important but can still be fun. And there's an overarching story sometimes that's rarely crucial, but it rewards you for keeping an eye on it. It's this predictability that makes them cuddly. Monk and his assistant will always survive. Each episode tells a self-contained story, usually with a happy ending. If you ignore the underlying tragedy, of course. The drama isn't about life or death stakes, even if they're investigating murder, but the fun of watching the protagonist escape trouble, or solve a mystery. You know that Monk isn't going to die in Season 5, Episode 8. There's another million episodes left. That's comforting. Plenty of people over time have taken issue with, well, trivialising death and violent crime in this kind of way. While not the entire reason for its existence, like some people would paint it, Twin Peaks played with the Murder of the Week format by having a murder of the entire show, focusing on its effects on an already unhinged town. The Killing, aka Forbrodelsen, would also do the same thing in a more po-faced and Danish way. It's this landscape I believe Dexter exists in some sort of existential quandary. Is it a cuddly murder show with ambitions, or is it a real drama that stands up on its own? Am I being even slightly reductive by suggesting that a cuddly murder show couldn't be a real drama? When I ask, was Dexter ever good, I'm not saying, was it a bad program or not enjoyable, and I'm definitely not trying to rob people's experiences from them. What I'm trying to ascertain, is it right to consider Dexter in the league of great dramas, or is it more appropriate to consider it as a beefed up, slightly more mature detective serial? You'll just have to keep watching to find out. And like and subscribe as well. I don't know why, I just felt like dropping that in there. One thing that's brilliant about Dexter from the very beginning is the look. It has a strong, vibrant setting and it uses it very well. This is Miami-Dade County in southern Florida. Sun, sea, loose clothing, and a strong Cuban influence that bounces off the walls. The show is also especially bright as well, which makes a real difference, I think. Something like this could be really gritty and horrible to look at. Not like gore-wise, but just sort of that awful teal colour palette that a lot of dark dramas that take themselves too seriously tend to have. This is the first generation of digital cinema cameras, and honestly, it looks gorgeous. Location-wise, I think it's worth saying that the first episode of this show is rather unique for an American drama, in that it's shot on location. This is Miami. This isn't Georgia, this isn't Los Angeles, this is Miami. Accurate and authentic. It's so rare to see in American television, and it's really worth rewarding. And this is what the showmakers wanted to do. They wanted to shoot on location. Unfortunately, due to circumstances outside of the control of the showmakers, this would be the only series with scenes really shot in Miami. I'm so glad that they did, however, manage to film something in Miami. I think the show would have struggled to find its footing without it. Before we go through the story proper, let's introduce ourselves properly to series protagonist Dexter Morgan. Morgan is a blood spatter analyst for the Miami Metro Police Department, with a fixation on blood. He loves blood, so much so that when he's not got pages of the stuff behind his desk, he's creating new slide cards full of the stuff. When we meet Dexter, he is an established serial killer, doing what he does best. He has a tragic backstory, presumably, and a heart of darkness. He hides this all by having a codependent sibling with a sailor's mouth.
Holy frankenfuck snakes!
And a girlfriend who is possibly the nicest woman in the world. To avoid attracting attention, he regularly buys off the police department he works for with donuts. Now let's talk about Dexter's sister and Dexter's lover. They're two different people, I promise. Dexter's sister is Deborah.
Your name is Deborah.
Deb is a lowly undercover cop with ambitions to climb the Miami Metro ladder. And to remind you that you're on American cable television where pretty much anything goes, she uses the word fuck as punctuation.
People throw a fucking rat.
To make sure you don't mistake Dexter for Miami's other crime show, they start by immediately shitting on Vice. Deborah initially works in the Vice department, and her promotion to homicide is seen as a cause of celebration, out of the lowly held cesspit and into real work. Yeah, this is better television than those coked up Vice boys and their jet skis and the Yan hammer. Even if the victims of homicide and the suspects in Vice are less of a Venn diagram and more of a circle, the homicide department are here to be venerated, rather than those prozzies over in Vice. This saint-like portrayal of Miami Metro homicide becomes very funny very quickly. They are embarrassingly incompetent, clueless, feckless, corrupt, gluttonous, perverted, and cartoonishly inept and incapable of seemingly the most basic police tasks. A surprisingly bleak portrayal of law and order by American television standards. This is not a country of line of duty, this is a country of law and order.
You are nothing but a low-life pimp who sells children.
Now Dexter's lover, Rita. Her living situation has this very twisted Americana edge, almost taking a slight bit of inspiration from something like Blue Velvet, I think. In the American Dream sitcom, she would be the loving, subservient housewife who does what her husband says. In the American reality, Rita is a domestic abuse survivor haunted by the shadow of her abusive ex-husband, who misused drugs and menaced his family. He's thankfully in prison at the start of the show, but that doesn't mean he's gone. He's still alive, and his friends exist. She has two kids, Cody and Asta, who take a shine to Dexter. Dexter presents himself, in essence, as a user of this poor family to hide himself. Now, Dexter has his own shadow to be bothered by as well, and that's his dad. He shaped him into the Dexter we know now. This is all explained to us by having us be privy to flashbacks that are pretty well integrated into the story. You can read Dexter as a form of detective maverick who will stop at nothing to solve the case. There's an initially quiet arrogance to Dexter's ability to solve, read, kill his targets. Much like a serialised, cuddly murder detective show. He's always able to solve the case before the credits roll. In the first series, the episode structure begins to feel very conventional in this cuddly murder world. A series of self-contained adventures with an overarching mystery going on in the background. Most series also have a big antagonist as well, usually the something killer. The first season has the ice truck killer, the third season has Miguel Prado, the fourth season has the Trinity Killer, the fifth season has Five for some stupid reason, the sixth series has the Doomsday Killer, and the eighth and final series has the Brain Surgeon, who is shit. Maybe a bit more explicitly overarching story than your average fare, but Dexter still has his own adventure to solve every week, that he solves alone, solo, ignoring the ensemble cast. The first act establishes the target, the second act is gathering the information to prove their guilt, and the third act is the dramatic showdown. Two things are missing if we compare it to a more conventional detective show. It's not really who done it, because we know who did it. There doesn't need to be. Unlike Someone Normal, the whodunit element has been excised because Dexter establishes, in his eyes, complete and total guilt. And you have to believe him because he tells you he's infallible, and it lives up to his scrutiny. It's not like he can ask anyone else. And before we're allowed to witness from Dexter's perspective what happens, he has already solved the case. The focus is instead the hunt and the showdown, and then the spectacle of watching him kill his target. They're bound, helpless, and once they're there, there's no backing out. They're dead, and you get to enjoy Dexter killing him, because Dexter gets to enjoy Dexter killing him. Yay! Something I was initially surprised by in the show is how Dexter collects his blood samples. He stabs them in the cheek, which seems a bit sadistic and, I'm going to be honest with you, completely pointless. After all, his preferred method of killing people is stabbing people, which produces way more blood to sample from. I don't understand it. I'm not complaining, of course, but I'm surprised there wasn't a note from the Showtime exec saying this was a step too far, and that his perverse enjoyment might get in the way of the cuddly murder fun. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed something I've been saying constantly. Target, target. Target. I'm deliberately avoiding saying victim. It would be completely accurate to say victim. Everyone who ends up in a kill room, as he insists on calling it, is a victim of abduction, torture, and sadistic ritualised murder. But you see, it's always people who deserve it, so it's fine. In flashbacks, it's established that for a murderer, Dexter has standards. He has an established code of ethics that are about as rigorous as the Ipso code of practice. But unlike a journalist's code of practice, Dexter is a lot more stabby in the front than in the back. It really boils down to three things. He can only kill people who deserve it, he can only kill people that he can prove did the crime, and he can only kill people that have otherwise escaped justice, though the latter gets openly ignored later on. We'll get to that. There's also this other thing about not getting caught that's kind of a big deal. I'm sure that won't come up at all later. So yes, Dexter has standards. You can't have your likeable protagonist being a serial killer, killing people who don't deserve it after all. This ad hoc justification for killing has never really been something I've bought into. But the commentary of having this device as a means of self-justification to a character, whilst the show doesn't necessarily agree with it, now that is interesting. I love fiction that portrays small-minded people doing stupid things, where it's a given from the guardrails of the universe that this isn't how you should conduct yourself in real life, and they're not vindicated by the writers. It doesn't need to be explained to you, even. It's just kind of obvious. If Dexter wants to be one of the big boy dramas, let's compare it to the best, The Sopranos, and the racism subplot during the third season. When Tony Soprano's insufferable daughter Meadow brings back an equally insufferable boyfriend, seemingly the only thing that matters to Tony is his ethnic background. Everything else goes out the window. That's what Tony Soprano gets hung up on. Not that he's a pretentious prick, something he could control and not be.
But Cagney was modernity.
Instead, Tony is obsessed and incensed by something that he can't control. I mean, they even have something in common, aside from being twats. Vito's homosexuality in the last series is treated in a very similar way. At no point is the show defending the characters acting in such a disgusting way, but they're disgusting people.
AIDS?
We're going to compare the handling of a season-long theme to this subplot later on in Dexter's run, and I'll warn you, it's dreadful. Dexter is right in the sense that he's convincing you that he's right, but the show doesn't necessarily go along with it, at least as time goes on. The writer of the pilot has some experience with this idea, I think. James Manos Jr., who wrote the pilot of Dexter, wrote for The Sopranos, specifically the episode College, which is often considered one of the best hours of television. I'm going to spoil it all for you, sorry, but whilst on holiday, Tony Soprano kills a man in witness protection, essentially for the crime of being recognised and ratting people out over a decade ago. He takes matters into his own hands, which, yes, is the way things are handled in La Cosa Nostra, but it isn't the moral answer. Knowing that this is happening is enough to test someone's faith. Even having an inkling that this is something that someone could do is enough to test Carmela's faith. It is essentially uncalled for, but at no point does the show beat you over the head with the moral dilemma. It knows that you know it's there. In other words, it treats you as the adult you'd have to be to really enjoy the show to begin with. But all of Tony Soprano's business is justified by his own internal monologue. There's only really a few cases where you actually hear it, but we all know it's there. And Dexter Morgan is no different. Made clear at the beginning of the show indirectly is that Dexter's narration is in the present tense. This isn't Dexter telling you how he met your mother, or recounting events. This is the now, a direct line to Dexter's thoughts and feelings. Yes, feelings, he does have them. This is a really interesting idea. It's just not really explored in too much depth. The character gets lost in his own hype and lost in the source. And while that'll be fine for some moments, sometimes it gets really unbearable. Like when he starts talking about the dark passenger, I just want to punch him. It's got the sort of edge of My Chemical Romance to it, doesn't it? Like, you could imagine that being a song on the Black Parade. Frankly, it would be better if it was weirder. What if he called the dark passenger Bob? Right? That would be more interesting. What if he actually turned it into a person? Well, maybe that happens later on and it gets really interesting for 5 seconds. Something I do really like is the idea that Dexter is trying to sell himself to you. He is an unreliable narrator telling you things as they happen. There's no dwelling on things. He is just telling you his thoughts and feelings. It's like you've got a stethoscope in his brain somehow, which, where he likes violence, he'd probably enjoy that. Dexter loves to self-mythologise. He has his bloody dark passenger again. But also there's his kill rooms, as he insists on calling them. Looking at these rooms, I feel like there's a few very clear visual influences on how Dexter kills. The biggest visual one is Mary Harron's interpretation of Patrick Bateman's murders in American Psycho. Actually, the show as a whole takes quite a few cues from American Psycho, including, I'd completely forgotten about this, present tense narration.
I calm myself and move into the bedroom.
You can tell that an adolescent Dexter probably loved that book and an adult one loved the film. This is actually one dimension of Dexter's character that would be interesting to explore, but it just never is. Dexter is essentially no appreciation for the arts or aesthetics, plastic, real, or otherwise. Patrick Bateman recites what he read in Smash Hits to you as he hacks you to death with a machete, but Dexter's mythos places him in a world with seemingly no senses or tastes at all, pure apathy. With one surface-level exception, there's a throwaway line that marching bands help him think.
Last time I got into your car, your radio was tuned to marching music.
It helps me think.
The metallic clang of brass showing him the light, as a pretentious sentence is more depth than the show gives it. What a failing. Dexter could have been really into, I don't know, Francis Bacon or something less highbrow, like 50s horror B-movies or something. The title sequence establishes a relationship with food, but then that's never really explored. He's just an okay chef, and he cooks steaks with Deb occasionally. Again, let's go back to The Sopranos. The meme that is gabagool eventually manifests itself in a representation of the Oedipal struggles of Tony Soprano. It gets quite deep for cold cuts.
All this from a slice of gabagool.
It doesn't have to be the whole show, obviously, but it's a bit of personification that could have gone a long way to make him more compelling. Him telling you that he has no preference is not to be taken literally, so show him having some.
If I did have emotions, I'd have to feel this.
But you do, that's why you're telling us about it. Back to the kill rooms. The way Michael C. Hall and the cinematographers talk about the kill rooms is particularly interesting. There's lots of improvisation, and it's usually unrehearsed, with Hall devising the kill as filming began. You can really feel this. Dexter has a greater dynamism in these places, especially after the pilot. This is where Dexter doesn't have to pretend anything to anyone. He is free and liberated in this space. It's your mum on the dance floor of my local pop world. This is good, interesting, unique as a concept. The kill room, even though it's many, many different places, is a safe space for the show to explore new ideas. Think the RV or the Superlab in Breaking Bad, or Melfi's office in The Sopranos. This is now an environment where Dexter can kind of play with things. Essentially play with his food. Well, I guess there is one slight connection to food there. And it's really fun to watch. Michael C. Hall is a great performer, and this is possibly some of the more interesting stuff. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but in Season 2 there is a really interesting moment where he almost breaks down with his usual alien ways and starts talking to one of the victims about women troubles, and even he's so disgusted by the man that he just is like, nope, not having this.
It's not worth it. You're better off without that.
That was interesting. He is capable of thoughts and feelings. Whilst we're on the subject of performance though, let's talk quality actors, and Dexter the show's disconcerting amount of wooden, wobbly performances. This is not hard and fast, but as a rule of thumb, actors with a theatre background have a quality other TV actors just lack, especially Shakespearean actors. One of my favourite directors, Peter Greenaway, put it best.
We need to have some good actors to be able to put this all together, which I really like working with people who come off the stage because they can hold a performance together in a way which maybe is antithetical to that chop, 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 chop situation that we find very largely in contemporary cinema, deeply influenced by television, of course.
There's just a discipline that comes with acting on stage. Now, I'm not a formally trained Shakespearean actor, but when I was a boy, I was in a junior abridged production of Henry IV. I only had a few lines, I was not a lead, and I'd read most of the histories by this age and seen Henry IV. I knew what I was getting myself into. It was, without a doubt, the most stressful stage work I have ever done. Frankly, I am not cut out for it, and I have an immense amount of respect for anyone who is. Everything about the way that Shakespeare is rehearsed, performed, and consumed is high stakes. A brutal intensity combined with the highest expectations imaginable on both sides of the curtain. It is like a military discipline for actors. And that's not to knock people who have only done TV work. It's just built different. I'm sorry, I can't help it. So with that in mind, I've devised a very simple game. Who's done Hamlet? To have done Hamlet is not literally to have performed as Hamlet or even been in a performance of Hamlet, but it's an exercise. In the cast, which actors have worked on stage, specifically the kind of pentameter and prose you have to memorise. It's not a science, it's not a criticism, it's just a recognition of an elite skill. Michael C. Hall was in Cymbeline, Macbeth, and Henry V before moving into television. Now he's done Hamlet. Jennifer Carpenter, Deborah, has not done Shakespeare. Her background is acting on screens, big and small. Now she's not done Hamlet. Most of the strong villains you can think of have done Hamlet. The Ice Truck Killer and the Trinity Killer have literally done Hamlet. Speaking broadly, the weakest antagonists and members of the cast have not done Hamlet. But it's not a science, it's just an exercise. There are plenty of good performances from people who haven't done Hamlet, especially Eric King, who I was very surprised to find out hasn't really done much in the way of stage work at all. He's brilliant. His performances carry a lot of weight. He's really good.
I don't want no fucking donut, Morgan.
And if I could think of one through line between all of the weak performances in Dexter, it goes back to what Peter Greenaway was saying before. This problem isn't as immediately obvious if you have fantastic writing, but Dexter as a show is a varied, mixed bag. There are some real weak points in the story, and unfortunately, when you've got the combination of acting
I'm so sorry.
and writing, you're just going to have a show. I would argue that the longevity of the show and why people gave it a free pass even at its very weak points near the beginning is down to the technical skills of people like Michael C. Hall and Christian Camargo, who played the Ice Truck Killer. I'm going to focus on Michael C. Hall here because obviously he's in the entire run of the show, but he's brilliant. Going back to what Peter Greenaway was saying earlier on, he can hold together a presence that lasts longer than the scenes he's in. It's as if he isn't reacting to the fact that there's been a cut or a camera angle change. He is still in that world, still inhabiting that character. Even if he's in a room where he says nothing, he can still be felt. Can you really say the same for LaGuerta? Even from the very first lines of the show, you know you're in good hands.
Tonight's the night. And it's going to happen again and again. Has to happen.
He's a sort of almost Atlas figure holding the show on his shoulders. Unfortunately for Dexter, there are dreams of an ensemble cast and show, so it doesn't really work if you're dependent on the skills of one person. So let's talk about that ensemble cast. One way Dexter the show really shines is by having great ideas for stock characters and an ensemble cast. The cast of the Miami Metro Police Force is fun. There's Masuka, your neighbourhood hentai, with no tact and no filter. There's Batista, the lovable head of the department, with a big heart and an even bigger
La pasión.
There's Maria LaGuerta, an at times gripping character on a quest for power against a system that frankly hates her for who she is, but loves everything she stands for. If she was a man called Mark Garden, she would be the head of the department. But she isn't, so she isn't.
You were just another detective.
Nice.
She's great when she's scheming, but otherwise can be a bit flat. When they pay attention to it, there is something that really works with her. Yes, she is set back by an extremely cruel and oppressive system within the police force, but she's also just a bit shit. What is telling is she's not as shit as some of the people who get promoted over her. I'd say she has two really great moments. The first one is in the sort of beginning of the second series. She tries to reclaim some power that she lost at the end of the last series. She does this by manipulating parts of the department against each other, engineering a situation where her replacement leaves because she's actually shagging her husband of said replacement. It's very House of Cards for the friendly, lovable, affable police department. And, to be honest, it's against targets who deserve it. Oh, funny, that's coming up again. And near the end of Dexter's run, she has a plot that runs the whole series. She has her own investigation and subplot that makes sense, is fun to watch, and requires her to very much build bridges with people she's deliberately burned in the past. It re-examines some of those relationships and why things happened. And of course it's related to Dexter, so that's kind of why it's interesting. Finally, out of the core team, we have Dokes.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Dokes is a fascinating foil to Dexter's world, and almost could have been the show's gateway into exploring something a bit less literal and tangible. Dokes seemingly sees through everything that Dexter presents to the world. He has no hard evidence or knowledge. He just knows everything. In many ways, Dokes is one of the more fleshed out characters on the show. He has a very strong personality, and it radiates through everything he does and says. The problem that he has is that he's never really fully realised. Unfortunately, if you create a character that can see through Dexter's mirage, eventually that is going to have to be revealed and dealt with. And it is. very, very early on, and we'll get to that when it happens. Well, I think it's now high time to move through the plot of the first series. A few things are going to come up, a few regular complaints, because Dexter establishes a rhythm only to play its cards way too early. And yes, it may subvert some expectations, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily that good. The show sets itself up to have at least 3 plots running through an episode. The episode-long arc of stabbing a baddie, the series-long arc of the series antagonist, and Dexter's relationship with human society. That's either Rita or Deborah. Before we're introduced to the pilot episode's initial hunt, we have our introduction to the series antagonist. There's a serial killer targeting prostitutes in Miami, which the police force treat with the tact and gravity that you would come to expect.
It's hard to say. The body's in good shape. She had a nice ass, too.
Dexter is seemingly out of a job here when it comes to these murders because there is no blood in sight. The victims have been drained of all of their blood. Eventually, after skulking around, Dexter gets into a car chase with someone he believes is responsible for the killings. The suspect is driving a van with a fridge inside of it. I believe Americans call them an ice truck. As a getaway present, the suspect leaves him a severed head on the road. This is the birth of the ice truck killer. It becomes clear that the ice truck killer is someone deeply familiar with Dexter's work, Dexter's backstory and his past, and Dexter's current serial killing. Is it a former accomplice? An estranged relative? Someone in the force who knows too much? Someone trying to bait Dexter into revealing his secrets? Someone his dad confided in? Who knows? For now. In the pilot, Dexter finds a snuff film producer who advertises his murderous materials in fetish magazines. He acquires a target, hunts him down, and kills him. For our entertainment. And it's glorious entertainment, obviously, because he's awful. And no more so is this apparent than with the slightly contrived nature of the way that Dexter sometimes catches people. I'm just going to be honest here. No fetish magazine would let an advertisement for something like this actually go to print. It's very clear that this is not fantasy material, this is actually happening in the world of the show. Someone would have noticed and someone would have called the cops. But no, only Dexter can deal with it. His need for blood and retribution must be satiated. But this episode arc structure continues, and we as viewers get into a familiar rhythm. Episode 2 establishes another victim in a very similar way. And in most of the episode in the series, we see Dexter get retributive justice in this way. The highlight in this series of adventures is probably Dexter's involvement in tracking down a murderous psychiatrist. Well, I say murder, he encourages his patients to take their own lives. It's an interesting bind for Dexter's hypocritical oath. Putting Dexter in a therapist's chair like this is interesting. This is something different. This gives him an opportunity to front to someone that isn't just the audience. I like it a lot. Doesn't feel contrived. It makes sense for him to build the trust of this professional, to find evidence. If you exclude the killing, this sort of plot feels right at home in something like Psych or Monk. The boys hiding in plain sight to work out what their killer suspect is up to. I think it works really well. Now, episode 3 introduces a kink to this predictable rhythm, which while not bad, starts to hint at problems later on. I mentioned overplaying cards. This is an example of that. Dexter finds a target, he acquires the right evidence, but because he's convinced that the murder was in fact self-defense, he lets the target go. Only in a later episode does he realize the error of his ways. Usually, the murderer Dexter is after is a day player, much like our cuddly murder fair where it's just one and done and they're gone forever. This is different. We're not used to supporting characters and characters in these kind of mysteries hanging around for a little bit longer. Especially in your usual cuddly murder fair, where episodes are designed to fit the syndicated mould of being shown out of order, this is unorthodox. From this point, the arcs are no longer neatly contained episode to episode. While this is an interesting idea, in theory, there are some real problems when you start to do things like this, especially if you haven't really quite found your footing yet, which is something that Dexter really does struggle with. A structure gives you a neat beginning, middle and end. And if I'm honest, very few shows can stick the landing when it comes to playing with this sort of thing. This does now mean that you have episodes that kind of drag on for a bit too long and maybe seem a little bit contrived, and things that could have been resolved a lot quicker taking forever. Dexter Morgan's relationship with Rita is usually a series of self-contained episode-long subplots, though, with a clear obstacle that must be overcome. The highlight of their story this season, though, is almost certainly their sex life. Both Dexter's aversion or supposed lack of interest in sex, and how Rita overcomes her own trauma and reclaims her sexuality, these both chip away at the ideas that Dexter presents to you in his narration. Again, this present tense, play-by-play perspective lets on far more than he would ideally like to show you. He does get lost in the moment, he does feel strong sexual attraction to Rita. It also plays into the sort of scenes from his past that we're privy to as well. He was almost coached by his dad to repress any sort of feeling, because he can't have feelings after all.
What happened changed something inside you.
Almost in a blink and you'll miss it kind of way. If you're digging for that and you're looking for that less literal meaning, there is something to work with. It's just not really enough. There's always the promise of something more, yet the show rarely delivers. Rita's plot falters, however, when the ex-husband is suddenly released into the world. Paul, the evil ex-husband, works much better as an amorphous, almost spiritual presence of evil rather than a literal menace to the characters. When Paul is more like Bob in Twin Peaks, he is more effective. No one can be as slimy and evil as the Paul you imagine in your head, the Paul you kind of know on some level. And we all know if he comes back as a changed man, he won't be for long. And what do you know? This is exactly what happens. It's predictable, and unfortunately, it's just a bit dull. Nothing really exciting happens. And I do just want to say for a second, there's no problem with doing anything that is inherently predictable. I've just said that the rhythm of the show is kind of a good thing, and straying too far away from that is probably not a good idea for something like Dexter. The problem is when it's handled poorly, or when it's boring, and unfortunately, sometimes it is. I do think the intention of pulling him back into Rita's world was less to actually be engaging on his own, though. I think it's fair to present Dexter, and by extension, us the viewer, with a dilemma. Should Dexter kill this shitbag? Even though he's not killed anyone, he's still awful and evil. If we know that Dexter has this power, and seemingly the power to get away with it, why not use it on someone whose soul is in fact pure darkness? Everyone would agree that a world without Paul is better. So go on, Dexter, why not do it? Go ahead, do it, please. Well, Dexter does make a decision, one that is actually rather well handled and, if I'm honest, pretty ingenious. Paul is a recovering smack addict, and after one attempt to violently assault Rita, Dexter knocks him out and frames him for using heroin. He places a fire up next to the guy as well, leaving him in a motel to be found and eventually arrested. He's violated bail, and he's done a load of other stuff as well. Bye-bye, Paul. It was not nice knowing you. In some ways, this is worse than killing him. Paul is now in prison for something he didn't do. His chance of being rehabilitated has just been left in tatters. Not one of the many evil things he did. He has, in a sense, escaped true justice. Dexter has also wasted the resources of the people he is protecting from Paul to fabricate this situation. Is this worse? These police officers could have attended a real crime scene. These are interesting questions left up to the audience to decide. No one really takes a particularly strong view either way, not least Dexter. The problem with introducing a character just for this single dilemma is how you do it. Paul could have even been a sort of day player character of sorts. That would have been interesting, an episode-long arc where he comes back and in a short amount of time causes some real damage. Unfortunately, and this is a real problem with Dexter as a whole, the pacing is all over the place. Paul is introduced in around episode 7 or 8, and it takes until episode 11 for him to really be dealt with properly. And unfortunately, his other interactions, both with Dexter, his kids, are just dull. He's just boring. The series arc of the Ice Truck Killer is pretty compelling, and I would say the successes of the Ice Truck Killer's storyline are why there are 8 seasons of Dexter and not just 1 or 2. The series arc establishes motifs, patterns, and intrigue that would shape the entire run of the show. And I like most of them. A lot of it is good stuff. It's good writing. For Dexter, the Ice Truck Killer is established immediately as a mirror image of Dexter Morgan. Dexter hides in plain sight, whilst this killer is someone who loves the spectacle. Dexter's victims are notorious villains, but end up nameless, faceless, and deep in the Bay Harbor. ITK's victims are nameless prostitutes that he makes famous by murdering them in unique and bespoke ways. Dexter wants no attention at all, and the Ice Truck Killer is an attention-seeking missile, laser-targeted on Dexter Morgan and his family. This is someone who knows Dexter's work and is fascinated by it. The two have exchanges and back-and-forth moments, such as the Ice Truck Killer breaking into his house and stealing family photos, only to then leave clues for the press that can only be solved by Dexter Morgan, using said family photos. They even chat to each other on Craigslist, which is probably why it was shut down.
Hey Barbie, how'd you like to suck my cock? Bingo.
I love dramatic irony in fiction. Having characters or the audience be privy to information that others don't is just fun. You feel like you're part of this intrigue. There are some great moments of Dexter being trapped in the purgatory of knowing too much, but not knowing enough to detach his own knowledge from his own secrets. The knots that Dexter is tied into are entertaining to watch. He is an unreliable narrator. No more so is this apparent when he makes mistakes. He is someone who believes his own hype. He thinks he's infallible. And admittedly, a lot of the time he is, because the show has to have him in it in order to exist. The ice truck intrigue at times is a subplot to Dexter's more stabby adventures, but at other times it's the focus of the episode. And there's other subplots as well. The supporting cast needs something to do as well. Deb has quite a strong bit of plot in this series as well. She's bored with her life in Miami Vice, but once promoted to Miami Homicide, she struggles to maintain the professional requirements of the job. Dokes is her sort of mentor, and they bond. They get on really well, and they have an interesting dynamic. They also have a bit of a spark as well, which is fun to see. But Dokes gets in on it too late. Deb has found someone else already. Deb finds an intriguing Byronic hero of her own that's dashing and determined. He's a plastic surgeon, and obsessive over the human body, and has a brooding quality and dark past, probably. Oh, I wonder who this could remind you of. Other than the answer to the question, what would Rory Stewart look like if he was from Hollywood instead? This is a massive problem with how Deb is characterised. She can only really date people that are surrogates for her brother or her dad. Despite her intent as this steely, no-nonsense, no-bullshit kind of person, it's a real shame that she falls into this Freudian trap. And just when you thought that he was a bit like Dexter, at the end of episode 6 it's revealed that he is the ice truck killer. And only you know. Dramatic irony at its finest. And they keep this going for at least 2 or 3 more episodes after this. You know who the ice truck killer is, you know who he is in relation to Dexter, but yet Dexter has no idea, even though he's meant to know everything. A lesser show might reveal this nearer the end. A lesser show like later seasons of Dexter. We know something that the characters don't. We've gone back to that break from the whodunit I mentioned at the start. The focus is on the journey of how do we stop them, or when will Dexter realise who this is, and when will they meet? How much damage will happen along the way? What I like about the dramatic irony in this first series is, yes, we know the ice truck killer is Brian, but we don't know how they know each other still. There's still a little kernel of intrigue there. Not every question has been answered yet. I guess if you're watching this in 2006 and weren't prescient to the knowledge that there'd be 7 more series, you could believe that Deborah might die at the hands of the ice truck killer now that she's dating him. Dexter's backstory is also fleshed out here. It turns out that his mum was murdered in a shipping container whilst he was made to watch. He was a toddler at the time. Harry Morgan found him and adopted him. This was of course kept from Dexter because it was in the script. I feel like this might have been quite a useful part of Harry's approach for taming Dexter, surely. But no, it was a repressed memory. One great set piece in this series is the blood room at the end of the series. Dexter is often seen as unflappable in the face of violent crime. What if he's in a small room covered in blood, just like that shipping container? And very quickly things get giallo fast. This is a room caked in the blood of all of the prior victims that have been drained and stashed away for this explosive reveal. Dexter and pretty much everyone else is covered in blood, and is sent back to a vision of what happened to him. This was put together by someone who knows too much. Maybe someone who was there as well. The killer, perhaps?
Finally got to you. I guess you're human after all.
The ice truck killer is in fact Dexter's secret repressed brother Brian. He was older than Dexter and therefore seen as too damaged to be adopted by Harry. Reasoning I don't entirely understand. I feel like if you had the conviction to adopt one traumatized boy from something as ghastly, you would adopt both. When I think of detective shows and secret siblings, I think of the abysmal BBC Sherlock and how that ended. What sets the two apart is construction. This works better for one very simple reason. This was clearly the intent from the writers from the very beginning, because they were established as mirrors from conception. Dexter and Brian, whenever they are on screen together, play off each other without knowing. And once they do finally find out, they're like a depraved version of Frasier and Niles. Watching their eventual confrontation, realisation and discussion about what to do and how to move things forward, it's just fun to watch. There's just one problem. We can't really let the killer escape justice. Now, I don't really care what happens in the books, I've not read them and I don't intend to, but I am aware that Brian manages to survive the first book and manages to appear later. In the television series, this doesn't happen. Brian is killed off, but we'll get to how. Well, now. Brian kidnaps Deborah and plans to kill her off in the old family home. Brian and Dexter have a moment together where Brian tries to convince Dex to come to the dark side, but Dexter's established relationship with his sister wins over Brian's attempts. He can seduce Deborah, but he can't seduce Dexter. And Dexter makes the decision to kill off Brian, his only brother, his only connection to the trauma that he experienced as a child. This, in effect, is a way of sealing that horror in the past. There is no living connection to it anymore. It's a rough choice for Dexter to make. It's interesting to see the cogs turn and him come to that decision. Again, we were talking about devising in the kill rooms. This is a great example of this. Dexter and Brian have a really tender heart-to-heart moment at the end of the series.
What am I, one of your victims now? You gonna collect a little sample of Barney's blood for your slide collection?
You're not a trophy.
Dokes is suspicious of Dexter and is now actively targeting him. As Dexter's on the trail of Brian, he eventually catches him just before the other cops do. And now he just has a hunch that somehow Dexter is in on all of this.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Supplies, motherfucker. Some fries, motherfucker. Disguise, motherfucker.
We didn't know how lucky we were when the worst thing in the world were Vine stars. Anyway, I think I was talking about a TV program. Something is afoot, even if he has no evidence. But that's left open for season 2 if they commission it.
They're always dead on when it comes to killers. Why is that?
Dexter and Rita end the series triumphantly together, with Dexter having cured the world of all of its evils. This clip finally plays. In Dexter's head, Dexter is celebrated, because that's what he wants you to see. All of the world's problems can be solved with Dexter killing them. Roll the credits. Wait, why is Jeb Bush in here? And that's the first season of Dexter. It's quite compelling television, to be honest. This brief overview and summary of the first series hides the show's major flaw, though. The story I described takes 13 hours to unravel. Most of it is spread out over the first 10. You might be able to tell that was enough to fill 15-20 minutes of explaining. The pacing at times is glacial, and in that, the time is not really invested well, and sometimes your time really is wasted. It's telling that the ice truck killer sections of the series have been condensed down to under half an hour for YouTube. The only thing you're really missing is admittedly some quite crass sexualized nudity of the deceased, which actually this is something we should get onto. Dexter really wants to shock you. The problem is that it's not shocking. It's very, very pedestrian. The only thing that could be mildly shocking is when it misjudges the tone and gets it completely wrong. And it does that a lot. It wants to constantly remind you that it's on Showtime, an American cable network where they can swear and show female breasts. Nothing else though, we don't want you to get ideas. But it has the emotional intelligence of a 12-year-old who's just discovered tits and the word fuck. It would be amiss to not mention the show's rather cavalier and, one might say, distasteful depiction of the murder of sex workers. While there's definitely an element of critique of the way that such cases are handled by useless and inept police forces like the one in Dexter, the programme very much has its cake and eats it too, and then pays for it. This may surprise you, but a show primarily focusing on the murder of prostitutes, while still trying to be funny, struggles with tone a lot.
How does he do it? How does the killer get rid of the blood?
It's hard to say. The body's in good shape.
We see the ITK having rough, initially consensual sex with one of the prostitute victims in a way that I can only describe as being very male gaze. On the one hand, the victims are treated like people, but on the other hand, they're also treated like meat, cold cuts drained of blood and dried out. Dexter tries very hard to be shocking, but like Dexter, you end up feeling nothing. Sometimes I think Dexter veers into meta-commentary, and it's definitely not the only time it does this. But sometimes it really falls flat and comes across as the very exploitation I think they're trying to show up. The rest of it is pretty pedestrian, and I'm going to be honest with you, it would have been pedestrian when it came out as well. This came out at the same period of time as Hostel and Saw. You can absolutely make shocking, terrible things on television. This isn't necessarily one of them, but I think Dexter really wants to believe that it is the most groundbreaking, shocking thing on television. Oh, there's a serial killer, and he's bad, but he's really good. And, oh, look at me, I can say fuck. Look at me saying fuck. Isn't it cool that I'm saying fuck? Who cares?
We hit the motherfucking mother load.
Each season of Dexter is way too long for its own good. There are 12-hour-long episodes a series, which is far too much time for filler, and the time is not used well. Sometimes it's entertaining banter and subplots between the cast, of course, but at times it's blatant time wasting that borders on being a wind-up. There's little in the way of interesting characterization, no one really has any interests or hobbies. Comparatively, the side characters of the Sopranos universe have way more going on than, say, the main characters in Dexter. What could you actually tell me about interests that, say, Masuka has, other than, like, dodgy porn? There's very, very little to go on. You only know the characters in relation to Dexter. At times it's very transactional. Dexter never develops the fun ideas it has enough, but in the first season you're kind of distracted by how well the main conceit is put together. Maybe the characters do have this, but Dexter's narrative just tunes it out for us. That could be an interesting idea to play with. Unfortunately, it's just not that deep. It's just not planned for. And to think this is the best season when it comes to filler control. It may sound like I'm being very, very critical, but I think in order to appreciate what you have, you must be willing to critique it and dive deeper, you know? The first season is very, very good, but if it was half the length, it would be great. And to think this is actually one of the better series when it comes to filler control. And a lot of the reason I think people don't point to this problem is because of the strength of that main series arc. But once these falter, the rest of the show's problems become way more apparent. And oh, does it falter. I haven't really spoken much about Batista, Masuka or LaGuerta yet, largely because Dexter's narrative only gives them, I guess, situational, transactional importance. When they're in Dexter's world, they matter, otherwise the show doesn't really know what to do with them, which is a real shame. For example, at the very, very beginning of Season 2, we're introduced to Dexter being part of the bowling team. He's out there hanging out with Batista and Masuka, and it's like he's wearing a human suit for a little bit. But of course that's abandoned as the series takes off and the show progresses. And then they're not really sure what to do with the pair of them. They're great performances when you've got them, but they're not amazingly strong characters. Something very funny during this season is Angel's brief flirting with The Secret. I wish there was more of this. It never gets mentioned again after episode 2, and I'm assuming that getting stabbed wasn't something he manifested. Season 2 should have a big antagonist. You're primed to expect something big. And if you read online about the series focusing on the Bay Harbor Butcher, you'd be expecting a spectacle like the first series. Well, you'd be wrong. One season in and already Dexter is the central killer of the series, the real bad guy. The first episode establishes that Dexter is having some doubts and is making mistakes since he killed his brother. He's feeling remorse, but he can't feel feelings, he told me that he can't. Eventually, a series of sloppy decisions lead to his cadavers being discovered by the police. So many victims are found chopped up in the Miami Bay. This is the work of the Bay Harbor Butcher. It's soon unearthed that these victims have links, prior convictions, slimy pasts, and whatever justifications that Dexter used to kill them. The press get wind of this very fast, and overnight the Bay Harbor Butcher gets what I think would be described now as the Luigi treatment. Yes, the Butcher killed people, but they're all dreadful, so who cares? In fact, he's doing you a favour by getting rid of them, said the press.
To provide insight into the Bay Harbor Butcher, evil serial killer, or avenging force for good.
Of course, I read this as commentary on how we as an audience react to Dexter. The fan following of Dexter, even at the time, was largely on his side. He is a vigilante giving us catharsis. Much like when in something like Law & Order they rough up the suspects, it's fine and it's great when police brutality happens to people who deserve it. I would argue the show does a great job here of expressing and critiquing that point of view. It's explored a few times and is handled pretty well. Comparing it to The Greats, though, the sheer hatred that David Chase had for the Tony Soprano Veneration Club is unfortunately unmatched. The Bay Harbor Butcher case attracts national attention, and sent down from the FBI is Detective Frank Lundy. Lundy is a bit like Dexter's dad, so immediately Deb starts falling for him. I have to say it's predictable, but it is unfortunately the best romantic pairing that she has in the entire run of the show. They have this brilliant on-screen chemistry, and it works very well. Lundy's actor, Keith Carradine, is also pretty great at playing a stoic yet playful FBI agent. Lundy is on a similar wavelength to someone like Coop from Twin Peaks, but of course, Dexter exists in a more literal, less challenging universe. Lundy is the one who starts pushing people in the direction of a single killer and seemingly doing the job of the whole homicide department alone. Dokes is also simultaneously investigating Dexter whilst this is all going on. What is he up to? Meanwhile, Paul contacts Rita from prison and tells her that he was framed by Dexter. He dies before he can be released. Rita feels some guilt for this and questions Dexter, namely, how did you know how to do heroin well enough to frame him? Coming up with a better story than I kill people and enjoy it, Dexter confesses to being a junkie user. Rita sends him to Narcotics Anonymous, which he initially refrains from doing, but after she catches him out, he decides to give it another go. Dexter the show loves to find metaphors for the murdering. In this series it's treated like an addiction, and that Dexter can be absolved or find catharsis in a support network like NA. Of all of the metaphors that the show uses, this is personally the one that holds up the best. Much better than when it compares his ritualism to organised religion, or homosexuality. Oh, and we'll get there. Then the show does something that I think is actually quite clever. It combines quite a few story beats into one mega event. Dokes catches Dexter at NA and concludes that he's an addict, which would explain his weirdness. This gets him to loosen his grip and his obsession over Dexter. It also makes Rita more comfortable with Dexter and gives her hope to work out the kinks in their relationship. It's at this point that Dexter gets a sponsor in Leela, a brooding Byronic hero with one massive problem. She's British, and therefore must be evil. Every British character that appears in Dexter is conniving, devious, and ultimately a danger to the survival of Dexter, with no exceptions. It's very funny. Leela is slowly outed to be devious. She's a sculptor of fairly unimpressive modern art that Dexter seems ambivalent towards. Again, he has no interests, so why would he care? She's also a fire starter, a twisted fire starter. The one thing Leela did make me think about was, of course, Brian. She is in many ways Brian's replacement. And it goes maybe a little bit deeper than that. I've not really seen anyone discuss this before. Maybe people are a little bit uncomfortable with the idea. I am, but it's a program for adults, so let's do it. Dexter loves Leela because it reminds him a little bit of Brian. The episode before she enters Dexter's world is all about letting go of Brian. Despite being dead, he's alive and well in Dexter's head. Brian appears as this sort of wild hallucination.
So how do I make you go away?
You think it's as simple as that?
But once he lets go, he's able to find something new. Something very, very familiar. One part Rita, one part Brian. It's Leela.
Hey Barbie, how'd you like to suck my cock?
I'd also like to say there are some very pointed similarities between the two of them. Both have dark hair. Both are unconventional outsiders. Both have impulsive tendencies and vices. Both act as a confidant and also catalyst to Dexter's behaviour. Both live in large, sterile, metallic flats that few people in the real world would choose to live in. Both answer an intimacy question posed to Dexter. Unfortunately, Dexter never really explores this in any great detail. I just thought it was interesting to mention. It's weird, her interests are at times way more defined and interesting than Dexter's, but ultimately, as a character, there's just not enough to go on. The Leela-Rita love triangle loses me, largely because it happens for very flimsy reasons that don't really add up. Dexter's passion,
La pasión.
for Rita goes deeper than cover, of course, but if it doesn't, why would Dexter be tempted? Why would he waste his time doing this? This could blow up everything in his life. He's not that stupid. Unless there's a disconnect between the words he's saying and the actions he's doing. Yeah, that definitely isn't happening at all in the show, right? The problem with this is that the show can never really decide whether this needs to be explored further or whether we should just take him at his word, and this is one of those cases. Dexter eventually confides all of his dark secrets in Leela, who becomes not just a confidant, but an active participant in the dark side of his life. She helps him arrange an opportunity for him to kill someone involved in his mother's murder and eggs him on, just not physically. LaGuerta, meanwhile, rings up Dokes' obsessive stalking of Dexter, but that doesn't stop him from investigating further, which inevitably leads to a confrontation. Throughout the season, Dexter's arrogant tendencies and scheming only continue to get deeper, leading him to bait Dokes into a fight. This is great stuff. The Dokes-Dexter dynamic is possibly the best relationship in the whole show. It's explored very well, and the two of them are fun to watch. I didn't really mention Dokes' dark past before because the show doesn't really, but he does have one. It's explored in enough detail, enough to leave us asking questions and wanting more, but never over-explaining itself, and thankfully the show restrains itself from doing any stupid flashbacks. For once. Dokes continues investigating and eventually breaks into Dexter's house. He finds the blood slides. It's all over now, right? The paranoia sets in quick as Dexter discovers the slides are missing, and then he gets a knock at the door, he's brought in for questioning, and this is it. Good has triumphed over evil, the show after 2 seasons is coming to its karmic conclusion. Hold on, there's 6 more seasons. We can't have consequence!
I figure you have more motivation than most to see Dokes brought to justice, so I know you'll be thorough.
No, the FBI thinks that Dokes did it instead, but to be fair, this is handled pretty well, I think. To quote Dexter's internal monologue, "Sod this, I've got killing to do." So he goes off to a cabin in the woods to do some more killing. And guess who's caught up with him?
Jesus fucking Christ, you're the Bay Harbor Butcher.
I really hate that name.
Jesus Christ, man.
He said that.
Surprise, motherfucker.
He said that.
Jesus fucking Christ, you're the Bay Harbor Butcher.
He said that.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I really hate that name.
Jesus Christ, man.
He said that.
Dokes now knows everything. Now Dokes just needs to bring him in. Of course he doesn't. Dexter has to think fast and work out what to do with him. Eventually he decides to frame Dokes, but still keep him alive. Dokes may have implicitly killed someone in the past, but he's not evil. Like his usual targets, he's just rumbled him. So alive he stays. The final quarter of the season focuses on this captivity relationship. The back and forth they have, like I said before, is great, and a new side of Dokes kind of emerges in this. He was the only one who clocked Dexter, potentially because they have more in common than one might think. Dokes was into some strange stuff when he was in the Special Forces, after all. The show does split them apart though. Dexter openly murders and dismembers someone in front of Dokes, and he doesn't really care for it.
You don't have to do this! You don't have to kill this man! Turn him over to the law.
I live by my father's law.
No!
If there was ever a scene that made me think about how the writers' rooms think about fans who vindicate and venerate Dexter's murdering of people, it is this scene. You hear it, you feel it, but you don't see it. This is the most emotionally impactful moment of Dexter. But you may have realised something. This is all seeming a bit final for a final confrontation. Dokes is not coming out of this alive, and we all kind of know it. The problem with this goes back to what I said probably about an hour ago. Dexter as a show gets very scared very easily, and it plays its cards too early yet again. Dokes is a phenomenally well-written character, by the standards of the show, and you've invested a lot of time into giving him character at the expense of everyone else. So, what do you know? He must die off. One thing that really does shine through about Dexter's character here is his lack of guilt or remorse. To compare him to other great murderous anti-heroes, Razelnikov in Crime and Punishment can only murder one measly landlady before the guilt eats him alive. Even Patrick Bateman eventually breaks down and confesses. Whether it's out of guilt, narcissistic notoriety, or what, he still does. Even more broadly, criminal anti-heroes get a chance of redemption or feel remorse. The fictional Henry Hill rats out the guys and stays in Witsec. Walter White bequeaths his fortune and kills some Nazis on the way out. Even Tony Soprano feels remorse when all is said and done, even if the window for redemption is long, long gone. It's at this moment that we're reminded that Leela is evil and finds out about Dexter's pet prisoner. She wants Dexter herself after all, so naturally she sets up Dokes to be killed. It's a race against time for Dokes to try and escape. Can he do it? No. And with this exploding cabin, the show has stopped one of its key threads of intrigue and killed off one of the stronger members of the core cast. This explosion sets off a precedent for the show. Major characters can and will be killed off in service to adrenaline, even if they have further to go and things are still left unexplored. It can go there. Plenty of shows have major characters that get killed off in shock moments, but to compare it to the greats, there's usually more of the payoff. It sets something in motion, or they're not as important as they would lead you to believe. The Sopranos, for example, wax cast members constantly, but they're in a true ensemble that is bigger than them. The most core of the core cast aren't killed off meaningfully until the very end, and their characters tend to live on even after death. Their relationships, interests, lives are actually explored, and they aren't just in service to Tony Soprano. Something he hates, by the way. Dokes is largely forgotten about for the next 5 years. The most memorable character the show's had, the one with the broadest appeal, the one that got memed.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Quite literally rests in pieces. Talk about dropping the ball. Wouldn't it have been more interesting if Dokes had survived and somehow tried to build a case against Dexter? Maybe that would have been interesting. Instead, we get almost a cop-out. Dexter gets away again. He's absolved, he's spared, to continue killing, for the sake of the show. I was excited at the beginning of the series, where it felt like Dexter was getting, not necessarily a comeuppance, but a real spanner in the works, in the form of this being unravelled, and the Bay Harbor Butcher stuff. I felt like it was going somewhere interesting. Unfortunately, it just couldn't help itself. A bit like Dexter. This cat and mouse game could have been a through line for easily 2-3 seasons. Obviously it's Dexter, so it would have dragged out and been filler, but handled well, it could have been fantastic. It is this rhythm that the rest of Dexter is truly underpinned by. The plot meanders and wastes your time for the first 6 to 8 episodes before things really kick into gear around the 9-hour mark. There's a dramatic cliffhanger in episode 11 before a conclusive ending, and in the last 15 minutes, Dexter gets his prize and scalps the baddie for you. It's now telegraphed that any character that gets too close to Dexter will inevitably die. And you know, if the show is flagging at all, let's do it all over again. We've got to shock the audience every season to jolt some life into this thing. We must match the high of Dexter killing his brother at every opportunity. But thankfully, it's still fun to watch. But naturally, that poses a very important question. What happens when it isn't? When people divvy up Dexter's good and bad parts, they always say that season 5 is where it started being bad. To which I ask, how the hell did you make it through the 3rd season? It's shit! The 3rd season is usually where shows come into their own. You've had 2 solid years on the air, you can evaluate where you're going, and you can respond to the audience too. But if you write Dexter, you can do something bold, innovative, and new. You can fall asleep at the wheel instead. It is here that I really felt the issues that I mentioned at the beginning becoming a real burden. The show's desperate need to play any card the second it falls into the deck, combined with the show's incessant need to dwell on things that are in equal parts boring and frustrating, really start to hold the show back. The pacing falls apart entirely, and the series is just confused. Not in a fun way, but in a I have no idea what we're doing way. Here's a question for the writer's room. What is Miguel Prado meant to be? Prado, on paper, is this season's big baddie. He's a crooked district attorney who gets tangled in Dexter's universe. Mr. Morgan starts the season by killing someone in self-defense, who turns out to be Miguel's brother. Seeking vengeance, Miguel pins the blame on a gangbanger who was also present when Dexter killed someone. In a very pina colada moment, Dexter and Miguel meet each other when they both turn up to murder said gangbanger. Oh my god, I can't believe you found me murdering someone that you also wanted to murder. Let's be friends. The two begin a friendship exacerbated by their wives getting on very well and their shared desire to stab people. Dexter now has an apprentice who can help him do his dirty work, and another confidant on his dark side. Rather literally here, he's the devil on the shoulder, telling him what to do. But he's in the light, he's the guardian angel, telling him to kill. Is this visual symbolism of Dexter's skewed morality? I'm going to say yes, because it's my video. Anyway, he's the apprentice, he knows too much, he will die. But much like when a younger me did work experience, the apprentice gets cocky fast, thinks he can do more than he can, and ballses it up for everyone else. Thankfully for me, that was just overexposed video, but for ADA Miguel Prado, that's running the risk of getting caught, one of Dexter's precious rules. Miguel's problem is that he doesn't have the makings of a major character. He just feels expendable from the very beginning. So far, everyone who has learned of Dexter's ways has died, including, as we learn, Harry, who has caused this whole bloody mess. Miguel is also deeply, deeply unintimidating. There's not a bone in his body that screams, I'm dangerous. He's just a bit pathetic. He's like a fanboy, which is, admittedly, something the show does pick up on and play with. He's sleazy, not intimidating. Someone like Brian is scary because he's affable, likeable, but also has this weird quality to him. Like, even before you know that he's the ice truck killer, you just sort of think, I'm not sure, I like him, but I'm conflicted. I feel like he's hiding something from me. It's the same sort of qualities, or almost anti-Riz, that sort of brings people into Dexter's orbit. It makes total sense. They're weird, but they're not sad. There's a sadness to Miguel Prado. I look at him and I want to cry. Miguel is going to risk upending Dexter's code, and by extension his life, so eventually he must be dealt with. I feel Miguel's death certificate is pretty much signed straight away, which Dexter kind of loves to do every so often, dangle someone in front of you know won't survive very long. But the problem is that it doesn't really build on Dexter's character in any way that's as interesting as anything that came before, and Miguel doesn't really have enough charisma to make him interesting on his own. Dare I say it, I think this would have had more oomph if they hadn't bothered with the whole Leela thing. Dexter's trust is going to be betrayed. Okay. And what are you saying? We know that this is going to happen. I read some of Miguel and Dexter's behaviour though as a slight send-up of buddy-cop relationships, and that was kind of interesting. A crime-fighting duo that stop at nothing to catch the suspect and get justice. They even love to loathe each other and have a bit of back and forth. It sometimes works. Last series we had a brief moment where Brian appeared out of flashback and as a real person in the world of Dexter's head. Clearly that device was liked enough in the writer's room that they've decided to give Harry the same treatment. This now means that Dexter has two confidants in the room with him. Oh, I do wonder who he's going to listen to. This character that's been in it for 5 minutes, or his dad that shaped his whole life. This approach split people at the time, but I actually quite like it. We know Dexter enough that we don't need the backstory explained in the same way as we did when the show started. Viewing Harry as an actual character, though, is a mistake. He is part of Dexter's propaganda campaign. He is, however, a great way for Dexter to open up and discuss motivation with people. Dexter almost treats Harry as God, and like a devoutly religious man, he has his faith tested constantly, which he feels guilt about. Dexter presents himself as almost talking to God, and that God is commanding him to do this almost. This parallel isn't new. Quite literally, The Simpsons did it with their Ned Flanders Dexter parody. There is one good subplot in the season, and that is of course Dexter and Rita's blossoming relationship. It is the show's best continuing character development, and seeing Dexter try and become human is fun to watch. Leela is in the past, and so is Paul. Both Rita and Dexter's demons are put to bed, Rita's pregnant, and they're going to get married. Seeing Dexter trying to adapt to a normal life is fun, interesting, compelling, even. Another plot point that works this season is his relationship with Camilla, the department's former office clerk. She is gravely ill and asks Dexter to euthanize her. It's this whole moral dilemma for Dexter. It's handled very well, and it drives some of the other story beats forward while still being distinctive enough to be interesting. Dexter is wrestling with killing someone who wants to be killed. It's an interesting look at the knots that tie his apparent moral convictions. Unfortunately, the other season plot points are total dross. Explaining it is somehow even more dull than watching it. Somehow, Dexter turns a murder mystery involving gangs and a killer skinning people alive into something akin to watching paint dry. You know it's a bad sign when the big spectacle that concludes the series is boring because Dexter is the one in danger. They're not going to kill him off. He's got a wedding to go to. I haven't really touched much on the ancillary cast here because the show doesn't really care about them in the moment. They're very much in the room when they need to be. Deb is dating someone you forget is in the show whilst you're watching a scene with him in. LaGuerta is rising up through the ranks and has started slyly dating Batista. Batista is still nice, but because Dexter never gets meaningfully close to him, neither does the show. But anyway, there's a charisma vacuum in the office now that Dokes is no more. So, to help that vacuum turn into a supermassive black hole, let me introduce you to Quinn. Quinn is an embarrassing blank slate, the sort of character you forget is in a room even when he's talking to you. He could be on screen right now and I'd have no idea. He occupies no part of my subconscious. I'd almost forgotten about him until writing the later parts of this video. Half the time even the bloody cameraman forgets he's there.
Hey, Quinn.
Now, anyone filling Dokes' shoes is obviously set up to fail, but as a character there is so little for anyone to work with in the space of Quinn, and to be honest, it would take someone exceptionally skilled to give someone as lacking in character as Quinn anything. Quinn is, quote, our new cop, 30s, handsome, nice clothes, a little flashy, to quote the script from the first episode. And that's it. That's all the characterization he gets. I would like to point out that Freebo and his girlfriend, one-shot characters who are both killed off pretty much straight away, are given significantly more detail in the script. The iPod that plays music as Rita and Dexter have a date and have sex is given more detail than Quinn. Quinn has less detail than a fucking iPod. Quinn is an afterthought in his own story, and the show suffers for this. And that's not getting into his boring corruption subplot. It's shit. He's just a body in a room. He is detective number 2, but with main cast status. It's very strange. But thankfully, you're distracted by all of these crumbling facades because of how good the rest of the house is. Dexter killing people is still vaguely interesting, and Michael C. Hall as an actor is strong enough to keep all of this together. But, you know, it's not the end. It's still got 5 seasons to go. If the writers can focus their efforts into something with big stakes, it will all be fine. And you know what? It turns out to be fine. Now, everyone loves the 4th season. It's so brave, it's shocking, the ending, yada yada yada. And yes, it's significantly better than what came before. As a whole, this season and the first one are the 2 best. The main series antagonist, the Trinity Killer, is the most impactful and interesting one, but what sticks out to me above all is the framing he has within the story. You can view every one of the killers or series baddies as a reflection of Dexter. Brian was a mirror of Dexter, an immoral serial killer without remorse or understanding. Dokes was a foil to Dexter's efforts, someone deeply morally charged who has killed, yes, but is emotionally conflicted by it. Miguel Prado as an apprentice is a reflection of how Dexter's actions have spiraled as a result of being taught, and how he's been led on a controlled path of violence. Trinity exists as a mirror of Dexter's stable family life, at least on the surface, and the upholding of the code. Now, admittedly, Brian does occupy a very similar territory to the Trinity Killer, but it goes in a very different direction. Brian never has a family. The Trinity Killer does. I think part of the reason why the 4th season succeeds and why people like it is this light it shines on Dexter's character. Brian was also a mirror to Dexter, but it portrayed a very different part of him, at a different point in time. This is Dexter trying to establish his human, normal life. The Trinity Killer has very much succeeded in doing that. Why is it so easy for him, and so hard for Dexter? It also explores Dexter's hubris and narcissism in a new way. Dexter just has to solve the case, he has to keep it going. But what happens if he does keep it going to the point of self-destruction? There's very little obvious mystery to the Trinity Killer. We know what he does, we know what he looks like, and we know how he's going to end up. From the moment we're introduced to a nude man standing in a bathroom, we're seeing it all from his perspective. The mystery of who the killer is instantly solved. We're going to watch out for this guy the whole season. This isn't a perspective we're usually privy to. Sure, we see other events happening outside of Dexter's life, but rarely do we see everything from the killers. We see a little bit of Brian getting on with the murdering, but it's very brief, and never in this much detail. There's something a little bit lurid, as I described before, with the portrayal of Brian's killing in the first series, but this is very different. I read some of the shocking manner of the portrayal of Trinity's killings as commentary on how comfortable and supportive the audience were on Dexter. Comparing to The Sopranos once again, it's like how the gang treat Tracy the stripper before Ralphie kills her. Something so unflinchingly awful and unsubtle that takes you out of the fun of otherwise fine violent crime. I can't in good conscience show you the first method of Trinity killing people because out of context it's visceral and awful. Trinity's MO is 4 deaths at a time. They think it's free to begin with, that's why it's called Trinity. And they are stabbing a woman to death in a bathtub, forcing a mother to commit suicide, and bludgeoning someone to death. Yes, it's a lot. Dexter tries and fails to do this again later on, so I think it's worth highlighting just how well it handles the tonal shifts here. And the reason it succeeds here is because it's trying to ask you something as an audience. Dexter as a show is quite glib. These are not portrayed in a glib way. Killing a restrained woman in a bathtub kind of ruins the good, stabby, fun atmosphere we've come to enjoy in Dexter hunting the odd paedophile. Pushing a crying mother of 2 to commit suicide is worlds apart from Dexter killing a killer. It's like concluding a campy horror movie marathon with Elephant. To be pretentious, Dexter takes a very funny games turn. It's confronting us with the horror the viewer is titillated by. But unlike funny games, it's not annoying. With the Trinity Killer, the central mystery is put on its head. You're wondering, how the hell could this guy lead a possibly normal life? We see another code in Season 4 develop with the same rigorous repetition, internal logic and self-justification. It's just as unhinged and self-effacing as Dexter's, but we're told that this is a truly bad one. Dexter's fine, what do you mean? That's okay, he's killing people who deserve it. In a weird way, with weird rituals. Don't question it. All born from incidents in his youth he was in some way involved with. He was born in blood as well. Ooh. I realise actually doing this, I've not talked about this. Dexter keeps saying this very funny thing.
Born in blood. Born in blood.
Born in blood? It sounds like a local screamo band. I can't take it seriously. One thing I really like about Dexter is that at no point does it bother to diagnose him with anything. This may be my psychology degree in place of me, but I hate hemming fictional characters in with disorders they only have when it's convenient to stereotype. Or worse, try and use hilariously outdated psychology and run with it. Comparing to The Sopranos, because, I love doing that. Tony's never officially diagnosed with anything, but shows some sociopathic tendencies. In fact, part of the ending hinges on a real, contemporary research paper that you can go and read. And compared to another cuddly murder program, Monk is never diagnosed with any disorder in the show, despite the marketing heralding him as the obsessive-compulsive detective. Dexter could be a sociopath, or traumatized, or whatever. It could be nature or nurture. Dexter in his own self-mythos has decided he was born and nurtured by the trauma he initially couldn't remember. But the show shies away from giving you a definitive medical answer and leaves it to you. This I love. I think is a fantastic idea. I'm still in 2 minds as to whether Dexter was born with it. Is Harry the reason it happened? Did trauma make this happen? There's a lot of balls up in the air, but it lets you think about this. It's not for me to tell you, it's for you to decide on your own. This is good. I like this. It really makes you think. Season 4 does a lot to establish an idea within the world's parameters that yes, something as horrific as Dexter and the Trinity Killer's crimes can be born from an event, rather than something deeply rooted in their DNA. But it's still not conclusive. That's caused them to act on it, maybe, but it could have been something else. It could have been for different reasons. Which brings us nicely to the plot. As the police begin to investigate, it becomes clear that the police department can't handle this on their own. So brought back from Series 2, it's Detective Lundy. Was Detective Lundy. Oh dear. Dexter eventually works out who the Trinity Killer is, all while battling his sister and spending time with his adoring family. He decides to don a fake name and befriend who he's worked out to be Trinity, and discovers that this mythical murderer is in fact a normal man with a seemingly normal life. Trinity builds houses for needy people, and like all philanthropists, there's clearly something wrong with him. We get a glimpse into his home life, and it's, on the surface, very, very sweet and pleasant. But as Dexter,
Kyle Butler,
starts to dig a little bit deeper, it all goes wrong. And eventually culminates in a fiery Thanksgiving that is possibly one of the best scenes in the whole show.
I am so thankful for you, Arthur.
Shut up, cunt.
And if we're talking actors and performance, well, John Lithgow is here. He is Dexter's adversary, and he does a fantastic job of showing both sides of the Trinity Killer, this sort of on-the-surface, loving family man, and this evil killer. Specifically when the two meet in the middle, which they often do. His range and portrayal goes deeper than just, oh, I'm evil, which should be the standard for a show like Dexter, but unfortunately it really, really isn't.
Hello, whore.
This is a man that has been deeply broken by the trauma that he's experienced, like Dexter. This is a man who tries to offset his depraved urges by means of altruism, by giving back to the community, like Dexter. Unlike Brian, he's succeeded, he's not been captured, and he has no interest in being captured. He doesn't want to let anyone into this life that he's made for himself, except for his victims, obviously. And unlike Dexter, we're not conditioned to agree with it. But that's not the only story of the season, and we will come back to him in a minute. There's more intrigue later, but there are other things that we should talk about. The Rita and Dexter subplots in this series are really good. Dexter buys a house with Rita and moves into this weird, not quite gated neighbourhood, but very stifling neighbourhood. This is a man who clearly wouldn't survive an English village. And also, Dexter has a newborn baby, Harrison. Unlike Astor or Cody, Rita's other kids who have grown up a little bit, Dexter is a lot more worried about the way that his behaviour could imprint on, say, his child. Again, it brings in that nature-nurture debate. Could someone as evil as Dexter raise a perfectly normal son? Who knows? I guess we'll have to find out. Rita really struggles with Dexter's constant need to go out in the middle of the night and do what he does, and eventually has a little bit of an affair. This is all interesting stuff. And Dexter's lack of concern is always quite entertaining. He doesn't really seem to understand that spending Thanksgiving with total strangers as opposed to, his real family that exist is bad, because he just doesn't think that way. He does care about them, he just doesn't know how to express it. He's like an alien. I'd love to see more of this. It's always good. Batista and LaGuerta are still dating and eventually get married. There's also a subplot involving Trinity having a bastard daughter, but it's quite boring and not really worth going into. But the show must go on, and so must the story. Now, I alluded to this before, but the Trinity killer kills 4 people? But Trinity, it's free. Well, it's because the 4th one is uncovered later on. Trinity kills kids. Again, it ties into that thing of being so much more horrible than the very sanitized way that Dexter kills people. We have a whole episode dedicated to Trinity's kidnapping of this kid, and it's not easy to watch. It's pretty horrible. But because they're only in an episode, it feels like a genuine race against time. I feel like the show could actually go there, and it does. There are some real stakes. But before we get confused and ahead of ourselves and think it's like a real drama, structurally it's more like a police procedural when there's a sort of character in danger and they have to be rescued. It's framed in a very cuddly murder way, but what's going on is distinctly not cuddly.
Alive.
After this point, though, things get, well, rather predictable. We all know that Dexter's going to kill the Trinity killer. It's happened every other season, so why stop now? And he does. There's a bit of a showdown, they have an emotional moment, and bye-bye. I'd say the only thing that's really worth dwelling on here is that this is possibly the first big kill that doesn't kill a part of Dexter. In the first series, Dexter loved his newfound brother Brian, despite his protestation. Dexter trusted Leela. Dexter even found a confidant in Miguel Prado, boring as he was. Instead, the Trinity killer is far more black and white in this way to Dexter. He poses a real threat to the world, so he must kill him. And of course, the show does this in a very familiar rhythm. That last quarter of the series is where the bulk of everything happens. Dexter kills Trinity, and all is resolved, everything can go back to normal. Well, apart from the traumatized Trinity family, and Deb's boyfriend being shot in front of her, and probably some other stuff I've forgotten about. Everyone is fine, and everything's okay. Those things didn't happen to Dexter, so who cares? Dexter can go home and eat some cake or whatever he does to celebrate, and then he can go on his honeymoon. Oh. Oh my god. Rita is dead. Before the Trinity killer could be caught, he had to sneak in one more kill. And it's Rita. And Dexter's newborn child is right there in a pool of blood, in exactly the same way that his mother was killed. Despite everything, Dexter's son is now born in blood. Right, let's talk about Rita and her death, because I think this is probably the shocking moment of the show. This is the one thing that everyone remembers, and this is the one thing that everyone talks about. If you look in any comment section, any forum thread, any Reddit discussion, anything, they all come back to how impactful this scene was. Now, I knew from the very beginning, going into it, that Rita was going to die in a very conflicting, very impactful moment. And it's big on its own. It's really, really shocking. You aren't expecting that. Obviously, the show's played with killing core cast members, but they're ones very much involved in Dexter's murdering life. They're not civilians. They're people that have double-crossed Dexter or gotten away in some way. Rita is an innocent person. She is the moral framework that the show hinges on. There is no doubt in my mind that this is the most impactful moment of the show. This is its last real trump card. For a lot of people, this moment is the catalyst for all of the bad things to come. This was the peak, and now we must descend back down the mountain. In a very meta way, as Dexter goes back to square one, so must the show. Things have to be reinvented, redone. Dexter has to learn all over again. And with that clean break, this is the end of part 1. Thank you for watching this Dexter retrospective, deep dive, video essay, whatever you want to call it, as long as it's something pretentious, I don't really care. My name is Byron Lewis, I am a writer and YouTuber. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, share this with all of your friends, and subscribe to the Patreon as well. There's some extra bonus content, special behind the scenes stuff, including scripts and notes that I make for videos. And if you have any feedback or things that you'd like to see in part 2, please let me know. I can't guarantee they'll be in there, of course, but it'll be interesting to hear what people have to say. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Thank you very much for watching, and see you very soon.
You said that.